Welcome to the Weird Library. I am the librarian. It is a pleasure to meet you here. Many have attempted, but failed, to visit through various means where you have merely stumbled. Indeed, the stars must be right, and the mists have waned. Do not let the strangeness of these walls concern you, nor the vast collection of its tomes. I have selected a particular tale in anticipation of your arrival. The Lost Vintage by Jeremiah Dillon Cook, read by Bridget Brenmark. When I came to at the hospital, the authorities informed me I'd been found near death by fellow hikers. My rescuers assumed I'd been mauled by a bear, but they couldn't explain why I'd been discovered amongst the ruins of a broken window pane. For that scene in the middle of the woods, they had no explanation. One cop I spoke with asked if I'd been hiking in the wilderness carrying a huge pane of glass, and I decided to go along with that ridiculous notion because I thought it would make more sense to the police than my memories. Hours earlier. Emerging from the trees, I pushed my hair from my face and retied my ponytail. Ahead, the Appalachian Trail cut through a large swath of harvested farmland before re-entering the forest. A small, gated, and overgrown cemetery lay just inside the woods there. I'd worn comfortable jeans and my favorite sweatshirt for the hike, thinking it would be a cool day. Instead, it was overheated. I removed my water bottle from my backpack and took a long swallow. The sip began to replenish the sweat dripping off of my forehead, but thunder startled me into spilling my follow-up gulp. Dark clouds approached from the horizon, blotting out the October sun. I could have called an early quit to the hike, but it would have been an hour before I got back to my car. Tornadoes weren't usual in central Pennsylvania, but the oddly hot day colliding with the typical fall chill made one seem possible. The flash of a movement drew my gaze from the impending downpour back to the cemetery. A woman in a flowing crimson dress beckoned me nearer. Intrigued, I returned my bottle to my bag and approached. I examined the lonely resting spot in better detail as I grew nearer. The fence was wrought iron, but it had been covered in rust, and pieces were missing in several places. Inside, headstones so old the names were worn off sprouted from the dirt alongside 3 crooked trees which had grown into a tangle of branches covering the unkept grass. Another crack of thunder caused me to increase my pace toward the graveyard as shadowy tendrils from the storm's edge reached in my direction. I made it under the orange, red, and yellow leaves as a deluge erupted from the clouds. "I can show you to better shelter," the woman said. "I'll probably just wait it out. Storms this powerful don't usually last long." I turned to get a better sense of the stranger. Her winged eyeliner was expertly applied, and her curly black hair was streaked with neon blue highlights. "Are you out here to film a vlog or something?" The woman smiled. "Why do you ask that?" "Well, you look great, and this trail doesn't usually get many knockouts strolling along dressed to impress, although I've never actually made it this far down the path before." "You don't look bad yourself." "That'd be all the hiking," I flirted back, hoping I wasn't misreading her intentions. It had been almost a year since Beth left, and I needed a confidence boost. "My name's Sonia, by the way. I'll be your companion while Mother Nature lets off some steam." Lightning flashed overhead, and the rain fell from the leaves and titanic plops. "Well, the earth certainly deserves a chance to vent its rage. I'm Camilla." A frigid chill cut the warm day to pieces. "Pleased to make your acquaintance." I set my backpack down and used it as a seat. Camilla pulled a cigarette from inside her low-cut neckline. "You got a light?" "Sorry, I don't smoke." "Pity. A good smoke is hard to come by these days." The wind sent Camilla's dress whipping back and forth, and I glanced down to see the women's feet were encased in grave soil. I gestured to the ground. "What's going on there?" All warmth melted out of Camilla's face. "The house is right there. I recommend you visit. The storm's only going to get worse." I turned to look where Camilla indicated and saw a large Victorian mansion nestled in the trees just off the trail. The home had an enormous wraparound porch with ornately carved wooden arches running underneath the roof. Paint peeled off the structure, but I could still make out the bright blue hue from its heyday. A large circular window was set in the lone steeple on the third floor, where a shadowy figure loomed. I assumed it was a trick of the cloud-darkened day, but the sight made my skin crawl. I turned to ask Camilla about the house, and she was gone. My heart pounded faster. I hopped off my backpack and surveyed the area for any sign of Camilla's red dress. The feeling that I was being watched grew eerily stronger as I searched the forest surrounding the cemetery for any sign of my lost companion. Camilla? I approached the spot she'd been. An unlit cigarette in the dirt was all that remained. I bent down to grab the item and confirm its tactile existence. As my fingers touched the paper, the earth swallowed me up. I landed hard on rocky ground a few feet below. Above, rain misted into the pit through the tree cover. A worm wriggled across my nose, and I screamed in revulsion, shaking my head to get it off. Adrenaline kept the pain at bay as I got to my feet. Nothing seemed broken. I reached up to attempt to climb back out, but I couldn't make the ascent. The opening was a leg's length from my fingertips. "Can anybody hear me? Help!" There came no answer, except for the continuing storm. I pulled out my phone, but I couldn't get a signal in the hole. The screen's light illuminated a smooth, rectangular stone in front of me. I stepped forward and found empty sconces lining a staircase leading upward. Unsure about venturing further into the unknown, I sat down on the first step. My pack was lying by the cemetery. Someone would notice it eventually. All I had to do was wait. Lightning blazed across the sky above and struck the tree, providing the most shelter to my pit. Wood creaked as a charred branch splintered from its flaming trunk. Water poured into the hole from the gap created by the destroyed foliage above. I backed up a step as a pool formed on the rocky ground. Washed in by the storm, a severed tree branch nearly speared me as it struck the dirt wall beside my shoulder. The soil crumbled apart to reveal a deteriorating wooden coffin. A sound of scratching came from inside. I imagined a rat gnawing through the wood to get at me. Instead of waiting within the flooding cemetery, I decided to try my luck with the unknown passage. Turning around, I started climbing the steps. The air grew warmer as I ascended. My phone light kept the darkness at bay, but my battery was draining quickly. I'd be forced to shut it off soon if I wanted to save it for any future calls. The sound of splintering wood echoed up from the depths, and I paused. Listening carefully, I heard something scrape over the steps behind me. After another moment, there was a second scrape, followed by a third. I turned and held my phone light toward the darkness. The glow didn't make it all the way down the steps. My breathing blared in my ears as I waited for something to step into the light. Somebody there? Time slowed to a crawl. The glare of my phone dimmed, and I hit the screen in a panic to bring it back to full power. The darkness on the steps below remained unchanged. Nothing answered my inquiry. Silence reigned. Unsure whether I was relieved or disappointed, I turned back up the stairs. Something ahead of me glimmered in my phone's light. I approached cautiously. Rows of bottles were stored on a crumbling wooden wine rack. Webs and dust covered all, but I pulled one of the bottles out to inspect it. Wiping away the grime revealed an unknown label, W. Chambers, 1895. The liquid inside was practically black, but I could just detect the slightest hue of scarlet. I returned the bottle and checked another, A. Bierce, 1886. The scraping sound echoed from the depths again. This time, the noise repeated rapidly and grew louder on every occurrence. Panic seized me, and I gripped the bottle tightly as I turned to face the approaching presence. I lifted my light to uncover whatever hid in the staircase, but I again saw nothing as the sound ceased. "You have one more chance to announce yourself if you're following me." A surge of frustration forced me to toss the bottle down the stairway. It was swallowed by darkness, but I didn't hear the glass smash. Instead, there was a single thump, followed by the sound of the liquid sloshing about inside its container. Something had stopped the bottle's destruction. I backed away from the staircase and crossed over a threshold to a new room. An old open door connected this space with the wine cellar and graveyard tunnel. I surveyed the area hastily, trying to keep my focus on the darkened steps. I'd found my way into a basement filled with tarped furniture. Dull gray light peeked in from 4 window slits atop opposite walls. A single staircase led further up. With any luck, I'd be back on the trail outside in minutes. The scraping sound resumed, and I returned my focus to the steps I'd just left. A white, spindly form emerged from the darkness at the edge of the steps, near the wine rack. In its skeletal hand hung the bottle I'd thrown. My heart threatened me with cardiac arrest as I slammed the door shut. To my relief, a lock on the door latched into place. I considered moving one of the tarped objects in front of the door for extra reinforcement, but decided to head straight for the steps. The faster I could get back outside, the better. I tested the moldering wood before trusting it with my weight, but I was pleasantly surprised by the sturdiness as I ascended. On the top step, I heard knocking from the door I'd shut below. My pulse raced, and I continued up to the first floor, ignoring the increasing urgency of the knocks. A rotting kitchen greeted me outside the basement. Rusted pans sat in the sink, and vines grew over the decrepit cabinets. The windows were boarded up, but light still slithered in from the cracks to make my phone's illumination unnecessary. I still had no signal, and I turned it off to save the battery. "You came." Camilla stood, smiling in front of the sink. "Abraham will be so happy to have a guest." Frozen by the unexpected reappearance of the woman, I felt my hands shaking. "He'll want to see you. He's upstairs. Hasn't left this house since he read that damned play." Camilla gestured to the next room. I blinked, and she was gone again. The knocking downstairs intensified. Wind howled through the house from the storm as branches scraped against the siding. There was no way I'd stay longer than necessary. I certainly didn't plan to go upstairs. Instead of following Camilla's direction, I went the opposite way and entered a boarded-up room with a torn-up chaise lounge, several splintered chairs, and a water-damaged grand piano in the corner. Glass crunched under my sneakers as I walked across the room. Fragments of a formerly ornate light fixture were scattered on the floor. With no way out in sight, I moved to the next room. Here, my heart's hammering started to slow as the back door stared me in the face. I hurried over to it and grabbed the handle. It didn't move at first, but I managed to turn it with a little extra effort. I heard the mechanism working inside the door. I pulled hard. Nothing happened. I pushed instead. Nothing happened. Frustrated, I threw my weight into the door. It rattled, but didn't budge. Sweat started to accumulate on my brow as I continued to try to force it open. At last, I quit and headed back into the room I'd come from. The piano began to play, slowly, out of tune. Even in its horrid form, I recognized Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Staring at the piano, with no player and the lid closed, I started laughing at the sheer insanity of the situation. As if drawn by my mirth, phantom forms appeared around me, dancing to the music. I counted 8 individuals, 4 men and 3 women, wearing the finery of the Victorian era. The men dressed in vests and long-tailed coats. The women wore corsets and bustles with ruffles and lace draping. The scent of smoke filled the air, and I coughed. "Guess I should have dressed up," I said. "Nonsense." Camilla stepped from the other room with an empty wine bottle. You're perfect as you are." She offered me the bottle. The label read, "Sonia, 2020. I took the bottle and smashed it in her face. Instead of a shocked reaction, cries of pain, or blood, Camilla vanished, along with the apparitions and discordant music. Outside, the storm picked up again. I tightened my grip on the bottle bearing my name and marched back into the kitchen. From the basement, the knocks continued. Moving through the area, I turned a corner and faced the main staircase, which stood opposite a large front door that someone had covered with dozens of boards. It would take hours to pry the nails out, remove the wood, and escape that way. The same went for the boards covering all the windows I'd seen on the first floor. I took a breath and turned to ascend. I'd need to play Camilla's game. Photos lined the steps. While dust obscured most of the details, I could make out 2 pictures as I climbed toward the second story. One was of the room with the piano, filled with guests. A lone figure stood in a robe holding a collection of papers up to the audience. The other was a framed ink drawing of 2 suns. On the landing, I found the windows secured like they'd been on the lower level. The rug running through the hallway had been eaten by time, but I spotted a pristine white mask sitting atop an unblemished black pedestal at the end of the corridor. The air was stale, and I stepped cautiously as the wood under my feet creaked with every step. A small bronze plaque under the mask read, "Performance Regalia." I considered picking up the object, but it felt so greasy to the touch that I recoiled, as though I'd just touched the antenna of a centipede. A door squeaked open behind me, and I spun, bottle raised high. Another set of stairs led to the attic. I shuddered at the memory of the shadowy figure I'd glimpsed up there when I'd been in the graveyard. If I'd thought I had any other way out, I wouldn't have gone up those stairs. Each step forward, the light seemed to dim further, despite the sizable circular window coming into view. When I reached the top, the door at the bottom slammed shut. My heart couldn't seem to beat any faster, and I felt my back starting to throb from my earlier fall. I'd exhausted the adrenaline that had kept me going without issue to this point. The room was small, but there was a large wingback chair in the right corner, with a small desk beside it. Atop the surface, a tumbler glass had been left out along with a bottle of dark crimson liquid. The label read, "Camilla, 2015. Outside the large window, the trail I'd walked to get to the cemetery was visible. Lightning flashed and thunder shook the house, but blue sky and sunlight appeared on the horizon. The storm was nearly over. "Fill the bottle." Camilla now sat in the chair, holding a dull dinner knife toward me. "Give us your blood to store in the wine cellar, and we'll let you leave." I took the knife, but I slipped it into my pocket. No deal. "I'll have to let him convince you," Camilla pointed behind me. As I turned around, the smell of rotting meat assaulted my nostrils. A man in a hooded robe stepped from the darkened corner of the attic opposite Camilla. His face was obscured, but I could see that while time had turned his outfit black, it had initially been a shade of yellow. "Let me introduce Abraham von Strauss," Camilla said. "He was once a wealthy railroad baron. At the height of his power, Abe threw bohemian parties for his decadent friends. When he heard about a play that had been banned for indecency, Abe just had to read it to them. As they gathered, he surprised his guests by adding in another twist. The person Abe had bought the play from told him all about how to arrange a little ritual to go along with the play's performance. The results were supposed to bring longer life to everyone involved. This was during the height of the spiritualism craze, so you can imagine the guests were eager to believe things like this worked. Surprisingly, those who attended the party found themselves without flesh by the end of the night, and old Abe was trapped in his home forever. "Were you one of the guests?" I asked. Camilla idly fingered the tumbler sitting next to her. "God, no. I found his mansion while I was legend tripping with some friends. The house moves around, so it's quite a challenge to locate. My pals didn't give up their blood when asked, but I did." "Spill your..." Abraham coughed mid-sentence. Blood. He spat an inky wad of phlegm onto the floor. Or we'll be forced to spill it for you. The last vestiges of the storm pummeled the home, but I could see sunlight growing nearer. Why do you need it? I asked. We don't answer to you, Camilla said. Do you think I was so insolent as to ask that question? I'm sure you wished you had, I said. Camilla looked at the bottle next to her and smiled. Yes, I wish I had, but it's too late for me. But not for me. I moved away from Abraham and Camilla to stand with my back to the window. I held the bottle out to ward off any attacks, and I withdrew the knife from my pocket. You can't keep me here. Someone will come looking, and I'm not giving up my blood. What's the alternative? Abraham threw his hood back to reveal an exceedingly elderly visage. The skin sagged off his face, and only the slightest wisps of snowy hair remained atop his head. His eyes were sunken pits with sickly yellowed pupils. We could have done this the easy way. The door at the bottom of the attic steps opened, and I saw the white form from the cemetery tunnel take the first step up. My jaw dropped, and I felt tremors seize my body. It would have been too simple to call it a skeleton. The figure was undoubtedly comprised of bones, but I spotted several skulls, multiple arms, and various legs sticking out from its exposed ribcage at different angles. Every piece of it seemed to move with its own mind, as fingers twitched aimlessly and jaws snapped open and closed at different speeds. Despite its impractical shape, it moved swiftly towards me. In a panic, I threw the bottle into the ascending collection of skeletal parts. This time, it didn't catch the object, and the battle shattered against the figure. The force was enough to momentarily halt it, but I knew it wouldn't be permanently stopped. I spun around and prepared for my only escape. Abraham shambled forward to stop me, but I slashed at him with the knife. To my surprise, his entire hand came off from the strike. Dust poured out of his open wound. With a moment's respite, I flung myself at the attic window. It shattered, and I plummeted to the earth, screaming. When I landed, I managed to get back to my feet long enough to run a few steps before collapsing. Glass shards littered the ground from my exit, but the soil was soft and muddy due to the rain. Blood soaked into my clothes and tinted everything scarlet. Camilla appeared next to me. Well done. I wasn't as brave as you. Over her shoulder, the entire Victorian mansion started to shimmer and then vanished. She followed. The storm clouds rolled away, and I was left broken and in pain. It has been wonderful having you visit, but time is fleeting. The universe has begun to shift away from our convergence, for now. Jeremiah Dillon Cook is a horror writer whose work has been published by the No Sleep Podcast, Castlebridge Media, Tales to Terrify, Ghost Orchid Press, Scary Dairy Press, Cabot Crossing Publishing, Timber Ghost Press, The Lovecraft E-Zine, Hippocampus Press, Necronomicon Press, and Eye Contact. He won Purple Wall Stories February 2021 writing competition and the Ligonier Valley Writers 2018 Flash Fiction Contest. While pursuing his bachelor's degree at St. John's University, Jeremiah received the Mario Mezzacapa Memorial Award for Outstanding Achievement in Poetry and Prose. He completed his Master of Fine Arts in Writing Popular Fiction at Seton Hill University. Jeremiah is an affiliate member of the Horror Writers Association and the managing editor of New Pulp Tales. If you'd like to learn more about him or his work, you can visit his website, jeremiahdilloncook.com.